Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. We are so excited to have another fantastic guest. If you missed our last guest episode with Phil Sabatini, chef's kiss, so good. Highly recommend you go back and listen to that and hear all about his story with Leo and his time with East Coast Gold. But today, I want to introduce you to one of my good friends, teammates and colleagues, Dr. Cait Tabor. And Chris and I go way back as teammates with East Coast Gold under Leo. But currently, Chris is I'm going to make sure I get this right. He's going to correct me if I don't. The graduate program director of exercise and sports science at Sacred Heart University. Did I get it?
You got it. Nailed
I
it.
got it. All right. We're really excited to have Chris on, and he and Leo are going to have a great chat. I'll be hanging out too and chiming in just about Chris's story, Chris's background. Chris has a really neat background blending kind of what I consider two sides of the spectrum in our world. And without further ado, Leo, take us away.
All right. I am so happy to have Chris here with us. Chris and I go way back, and we'll cover that story because there's a lot of interest in what's going on with that. And it's just so nice to and I always say one of the reasons I have any success in my life is because of all the good quality people I hang out with. And Cait, of course, you're one of those. But Chris has been such a cool part of my growth and learning, and hopefully I've had a little bit with his, but I think it's worked the other way a lot more. He's really shown me a lot, and but again, just good quality people. I mean, we had Phil on, we'll have some other people on for interviews, and it's one of the things that I think that people can really learn from. Just hang out with really good people. Okay, don't hang out with people that are drama or that pull you down. Hang out with people that are going to lift you up. And Chris, you're definitely one of those. So we really appreciate you taking the time because you are one busy guy, especially with a little 1.5-year-old running around. That kind of adds to things too, doesn't it?
Yeah, it keeps you busy.
That's for sure. So let's just get started here a little bit. I noticed that when she said your position at Sacred Heart, you had something to do with sports science a little bit.
Yep.
Tell everybody a little bit more about what sports science actually is, because not everybody is up on that as much. They might be a weightlifter, they might be into some other things with strength and conditioning, but what is sports science?
Yeah, this is a great question. So really, everyone seems to know some other broad headings like the field of exercise science. Strength conditioning has become much more common now because people are having their strength coaches that are working with them. So they're pretty familiar with them, but sports science is not necessarily a new field. It's just not as well known. It's become more formalized in the early 2000s, and that's really where my research lineage lies. So if we go back to exercise science for a minute, most people are familiar with that. Exercise science is the study of how exercise impacts the body. And they look at mechanisms and outcomes, sometimes related to health, occasionally performance, but it's more of a singular focus. Like, what does exercise do and how does it affect the body? Which is a great thing to know. Then you have the field of strength and conditioning, which is an applied field where you're working with athletes, you're designing training programs, you're evaluating if they work, and you're taking them through every aspect of their development to make them the best athlete possible. Then we move to sports science. Sports science is really looking at the scientific method and applying it to performance to try and make sure that the training plans that athletes are doing and the holistic picture is leading towards greater performance outcomes. So sports science is simply applying the scientific method to sports performance in order to enhance the outcomes, which in our case is making people as good at their sport as possible. Sports scientists work with strength coaches. They also work with head coaches. The athletes work with nutritionists. And so where exercise science is more reductionistic, working down to mechanisms, sports science is broad in that we will pull from a wide variety of backgrounds and really do anything we can to maximize performance. And the end goal there is sports performance, which is different than some of the other fields where health might be more paramount. That's all we really care about, is the end result being the best the athlete can be.
Well, I think that's a really important point that you point out about sports science working with all the other parts of the coaching atmosphere. I mean, with you don't work in an island by yourself. In order to get the best performance out of your athletes, to keep them as healthy as possible, and to have them perform at their top level, it's not just about what the coach does. It's how the coach works with the sports scientists, how the coach works with the athletic trainers, how that all works together. And I think sometimes coaches are a little bit leery of working with sports science. It's like, well, they're more about the practical, what they consider the practical part of it. And sometimes the scientists, they feel like they're kind of doing their thing and nobody really bridges the gap. So I think that's really important, to bridge the gap between what the sports scientist is saying and what the coach is actually applying.
Yeah, exactly. I'm an applied sports scientist, so I integrate in with the athletes and all the other coaches. We're there at practices, we're there at games. We're collecting data in the short and long term, but we don't just collect data and then disappear and write up a study. The main thing that we do first, before any studies are created, is we collect the data and we provide that back to all of the coaching staff that surrounds the athletes so that they can make informed decisions. And then once they make the decisions, hopefully it yields a better process for the athlete's development. The studies come secondary in our field. So we want to make sure that sport is improving, and then anything that branches off from that is great. And so first and foremost, we want that data to be applied. We're there every day. We're being seen by the athletes. We're being seen by the coaches. We're integrating in with them, providing input where we need. And sometimes we're just saying, what you're doing is working. Like, continue on. You're doing great. And it's just another check for the coach to say their intuitions and their practice and their theory that they're using is working. So a lot of times we may not adjust anything because there's nothing to fix. The plan is going accordingly. Or we might flag some athletes that maybe they're falling a little bit behind and we can make some adjustments here and there. But it always starts from an applied perspective first, and then the studies and the research will occur secondary to those outcomes.
I love that clarification, because I think, and that's kind of what I was getting at when I was saying, I feel like you do such a beautiful job living on both ends of that spectrum, right? Of like research and applied. And as someone who has been in more of that applied world, in the strength and conditioning sense of it at the college level, and has to dip into the research to have my foundation and to, have my back, it's been really fun to navigate conversations with you over the years, as someone who really gets the research, can dig into it and interpret it, but just as beautifully understands how to relate to people. Because we do often see that barrier on both sides, where on the applied side, they can't interpret the research, and on the research side, they can't bring that to the people and make it understandable. So I love that. I love that explanation.
Well, and I think if nothing else, I think sometimes the sport coach tends to almost get stagnant because they do the same thing all the time. And I think what this does, that actually leads to their growth mindset. And I think more coaches really should have that growth mindset, because times change, strategies change. And, a lot of times coaches say, well, we've been doing it this way for 20 years and we've accomplished this and accomplished that. But times change, athletes change, the whole science changes. So that application, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
Well, getting into continuing with the sports science, how did you even get started, Chris? I mean, I know, but I think the audience needs to know, how did you really get into this? I mean, you didn't start off saying, hey, I want to be a sports scientist.
Yeah. So I went to Penn State for my undergrad, and all through that, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, and nobody had really told me that there was a field of sports performance at the time. I knew there was strength and conditioning, but I didn't know that there was a scientific backing behind developing athletes. So it really started when I took a class with Dr. Vladimir Zadiorsky. Many people will be familiar with him from the book that he wrote, which was The Science and Practice of Athletic Development. He wrote it with Dr. Kramer. Then I took a class, and he's like, yeah, you can do this with athletes, because he was an original sports scientist in Russia that worked with the weightlifting team, and then he defected to the United States. So I took his class, and I'm like, all right, putting all my eggs in the sports performance basket, I graduated, I moved home. I was working a job in a commercial gym, which was fine. It's just not my thing. And I just happened to look on the website and find out there was a weightlifting coach in my area, and I wanted to learn the sport of weightlifting. So I used a phone. I called someone on the phone, like a landline, and I called Leo up, and he said, hey, come train with us. We train twice a week in the mornings in Littlestown, Pennsylvania. And then I came and I learned weightlifting from you. So I learned the sport of weightlifting. I started competing and then coaching. In a short time, I got my level 1 under you and started coaching. And then from there, through the connections, we knew that there was a weightlifting site at one of the Olympic training sites down at East Tennessee State University. And that was, at the time, the premier sports science, really the only one in the United States doing applied sports science. They just so happened to be an Olympic training site that had weightlifting, and it pretty much merged all of my interests. I could coach the sport, I could do research on the sport, and I could obtain my PhD at the same time. So in 2013, I moved down to Tennessee, and then I completed my doctorate from there. And then from that position, I applied here at Sacred Heart. I got hired here, and I've been here ever since 2016.
Well, it's kind of cool how how all this developed, and to this day, we still go to the East Tennessee, their coaches college that they hold every year in November, which, by the way, I highly recommend. And I still remember the first trip that I knew I knew Dr. Stone and Meg Stone, and I knew some of the people out there. So I was going to go to that conference, and you decided to come along, and Doug Lentz came along with us. If I remember that trip was a long trip, but Doug kept us awake, though. I remember that quite well. Matter of fact, his conversation skills are top notch. I don't think you and I got a word in edgewise. He just kind of talked the whole time. But the point here is that, I introduced you to that whole system, and they saw the value of you and the potential of you and what you were doing. So that was kind of the start of things. And it's kind of funny how you ended up getting your PhD there, and we still go back every November, and they have you speaking, they have me speaking, and that's just a wonderful conference. So I'm hoping we can continue that tradition. That's always been a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that's one of the things that is very interesting for the people to know is that you started off. You weren't really sure what you wanted to do, and it just kind of kept progressing from there and building from there. And now you have a wonderful position at Sacred Heart, and it's kind of cool how things just kind of keep blossoming like that. Mm-hmm. So, and I think one of the things that I really like about all the things you've done is I know I've had a lot of really good mentors along the way, and you certainly did with all the contacts you had at East Tennessee and now Sacred Heart. You want to just mention about mentorship just a little bit? What you feel like has kind of helped you along the way?
Yeah, a lot of people ask how to get started in the field, whether it be in strength and conditioning or sports science. And the first thing you want to do is really just go and volunteer and see if you even like it. Yep. So once you do that, go in and introduce yourself to the head strength coach at the university that you're at, or if there's a facility near you. Just volunteer your time, see what it's like, show up, have an open mindset, be willing to do anything. If you're not currently training, start training, try different methods of training. And then once you decide which way you really want to take it, if you want to be that strength coach in working with athletes, you need to start moving in that direction. And you need to then start to pick a good group of people to learn under. You want to pick the right mentors that are going to get you where you want to go. You want to make sure that your goals and values align with that mentor's goals and values. You want to make sure that your personalities match and that they have your best interest at heart, that they want to see you develop. They want you to be there while you're there. And when you've met what they feel they need to teach you, they're going to propel you to your next position. And that is really important. You want to make sure it's a good match, because if you're in a position where the mentor wants something different than you, the outcomes might not be in alignment. You won't really know until you get in there. You may need to try a couple different mentors or a couple different coaches that you work with to really find what you want. But once you do that, that will really help propel your career. It's the connections that that coach has and that mentor has that can get you to the next level. And often, if they speak very highly of you to other people in the field and you come from a system where they're putting out good coaches, that can really, jumpstart your career and help you going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, as someone who has had both phenomenal mentor experiences and some really not great experiences in my early days in college strength and conditioning, it's so important. It's so important. And sometimes you got to stick out the bad experience, and other times you got to step away because of everything Chris just said is, it has to be a compatible relationship, because they're the ones that are going to be in rooms that you don't have access to yet, saying your name or not saying your name. And it's really, really important.
And I think it's important, too, that wherever you do decide to go, give it a chance. I think sometimes, we want that immediate gratification.
Sure, yeah.
And in that first couple weeks, if it's not exactly what you want, I got to go someplace else.
No.
Sometimes you just need to give it a chance.
Yeah.
And, really find out more about what's going on. Learn as much as you can. And as Joe Ken once, I heard him quote one time about when he left a certain position, I forget what school it was, he said his goal was always to leave that position better than when he got there.
That.
So I think sometimes we tend to jump around to different places when we really don't give them a chance. So learn as much as you can from each spot. Take what you learn, and then apply that to what your next position is. But the grass isn't always greener.
No. I'm just saying that we can't stay in toxic environments either, because there's a lot of that out there.
That's true.
There's a lot of that out there, unfortunately, in our industry. So it doesn't mean you can't take everything you need from it and grow and become a better coach because of it. It also gives you clarity on what does and doesn't speak to your values. Yeah.
Do we want to put a plug in for our coaching mentorship program that we have now?
Sure, we'll talk about it.
Would now be a good time?
We can bring it up now. We'll also talk about it a little bit at the end of the episode. But I think we were joking before we got on the call today that this threw us back. Now, we go back. Chris and I started in weightlifting, I think, like the same year. Mm-hmm. And we're just kind of parallel for a while until we collided, even though we were on the same team. Mm-hmm. But we're reflecting back to 2018, 2019, when we really started, the three of us, working on what would become the mentor program and the curriculum for it. And it was a little deja vu getting on this call and the three of us all being together, because we've got this beautiful mentor program that we've been running for over 5 years now, that the three of us collaborated on together, brought each of our expertises to. Pretty deep alumni pool in it now, and it's been a lot of fun to work on that with these two, and we are on waitlist for our next cohort that will start in the fall.
You want to explain a little bit more in depth about what it entails?
Yeah, let's do that at the end of the episode, though. We'll save that
another episode for that?
At the end of the episode. That way we can really pick Chris's brain right now.
There you go. That sounds good. Okay. Let's talk about weightlifting movements and how it applies in the strength and conditioning world. One of the things that I found a lot of times is that you have some strength and conditioning coaches that when you want to introduce the weightlifting movements or Olympic lifts, we just call it weightlifting. They say, well, we're not making weightlifters. We're making football players or volleyball players or whatever. And what about using the weightlifting movements, though? Because I always say we're not making weightlifters necessarily. We're using the weightlifting movements to make you better athletes. Your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, so this argument still pops up to this day. It's like an old and tired argument at this point where some coaches say, like, we do this, we'll never use weightlifting movements, we'll only do weighted jumps, or we'll use this method and not another. So for my grand idea with training is you have all these different methods. They're just different items in your toolbox for coaching. I would rather have as many available to me as possible and draw from them when I need them in specific situations than go ahead and write one off. So many people will say, we're not going to teach the weightlifting movements because they're difficult to teach. I can't get my whole group to be perfect. They take time away from other things we could be doing. We can get the same outcomes from other exercises. And some of the arguments may be okay. It's hard to teach in a large group.
Yeah.
However, it's pretty clear that once you develop a system, and if you're a good enough coach, teaching the movements can be done pretty seamlessly in about 2 weeks with a small amount of time investment. There are other ways, if you know them intimately, that you can start loading them right away. So as their technique is needing to be developed, there's other ways to load them. And they do have unique benefits compared to some of the other methods. So if you can layer them on top of an already well-designed strength and conditioning program, they do have additional benefits that you can gain compared to things like weighted jumping. They can be built in for variation in the training plan. Different execution of the lifts can be done at different times of the year. It gives you a wide spectrum of loading from light to heavy depending on the execution. And this part's often just missed. Doing the weightlifting movements is just fun. The athletes love to do them. Yeah, they're challenging, but there's nothing better than doing some of the weightlifting movements in the gym. And once you become good at them and you can go a little bit heavier, athletes love to do them. They're challenging, and I think that's often missed. Like, cool, doing a weighted jump is awesome, but doing a really well executed, snatch or a jerk, it just is a fun thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that you talked about, that some coaches say, well, it's too hard to teach. I was in a high school setting for 30 years. I taught, I don't want to say dumb little ninth graders, but yeah, they are. They think they're really smart, but no, they're about as smart as a box of rocks, right? If I can teach ninth graders how to snatch and clean and jerk to the point where they're handling significant weight, anybody can teach it. So yeah, that's an argument that it's a skill, and it takes time to develop that skill. But if they see the value in it, and there is a lot of value, if they can see that and they buy into it, it's very worthwhile, and it's not as hard to teach as they say, as they think. But yeah, I think that's important about having just as many tools in the toolbox as possible. So
I think it goes to confidence too in the coach, and we've talked about this on another episode. But if a coach isn't confident in teaching the lifts, they're not going to be able to execute that, and it is going to feel overwhelming. And it goes back to a point that Chris made earlier in the episode is, and I don't think this gets talked enough about, especially in the strength and conditioning field, it's really important that as sports performance coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, that we are practicing the movements that we are teaching, right? As someone who is a competitive weightlifter, when I was in the heyday of my strength and conditioning career, things like pull-ups and bodyweight movements and all of that wasn't my skill set, but I knew I had to work at it so that my body understood that progression to its extent so that I can work with the athletes that were struggling with it or work with the athletes that were progressing with it. And I think that that's a lot of times the missing piece with weightlifting too, is not enough strength and conditioning coaches try it themselves, practice it themselves to develop a certain amount of competency and understanding of it so that they can confidently teach some of these progressions in larger settings.
And they can break it down into parts. They don't have to do the full movement. I mean, they don't have to do a full deep snatch from the floor.
Right.
Same thing with the clean, but they can take parts of it and utilize the force production and the force absorption, all the things we talk about. It doesn't have to be the full movement.
Absolutely.
And I always like to use the term, you train like a weightlifter, or you can train as a weightlifter. Now, if you're a weightlifter, what's your goal? The goal is to put as much weight over your head with a snatch and clean and jerk as possible. What's your goal as a strength and conditioning coach? Train like a weightlifter, but not exactly as a weightlifter. So that kind of brings me into the next thing, Chris, about how closely should the weightlifting movements mimic what's going on in the sport?
Yeah, there's been this emergence of functional coaches online, and these coaches come up with these crazy exercises, people standing on Bosu balls or standing on bands, or like throwing weird objects at athletes, and somehow they convince professional athletes to get in these videos, and they're like, look, it's applicable to the sport. The carryover from that is, it's controversial. How much it's really helping them, who knows? Maybe them not loading as heavy is probably making them feel better because it's pretty much doing nothing and not loading their joints. But it's probably not making them better at their sport. So what we're doing in the gym, even though these athletes, there's no squat racks on the football field or the soccer field, what you're doing in the gym is you're developing physical qualities in the athlete that makes them more robust, more resilient, and then they try and carry that over to sports performance. So in the gym, we're developing your ability to produce force. We're developing your ability to produce high power outputs. We're producing your ability to sustain power outputs over time, which is applicable for certain sports. And as those capabilities rise, then you go in and you do your skill practice with your coach, with your skill and other positional coaches, and you transfer your force production and power output capabilities to your sport-specific skills. So as we raise the ceiling of your capabilities in the weight room, and you learn how to express forces at the correct velocities, that's when it transfers over. That's what we call dynamic correspondence. So what we're trying to look for is, are the joints that are involved in sport trained in the gym? Are the muscle actions that are involved in sport trained in the gym? And are they done at the right speeds, the right velocities that are going to carry over? So we don't mean that you're moving at exactly the same speed, right? If you're doing something like sprinting, there's nothing in the gym that's going to match the demands of sprinting, but we can train all the lower body musculature so that it's ready to undergo sprinting and the forces that it's going to encounter when sprinting. So I think that's the disconnect when people put in functional movements and they're thinking that, just sagittal plane movements aren't going to carry over as well to sport. But what they're missing is the physiological adaptations that come along with those movements that build up the physical capabilities in the athlete.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because coaches and strength coaches always talk about sport specificity, and you just touched on that. I mean, how specific should these functional movements be? And I think if you try to make them super specific, the specificity of the skill happens on the court and on the field. Okay, I don't think you're getting that in the weight room, and some coaches try to do that.
Sure. Yeah. Awesome. Leo, do we have any other questions for Chris?
Well, yeah, and kind of along that same line, you still have some coaches, I think, that if you go heavy, that it slows you down. And what's your answer to that?
All right, so the first...
Because we do go heavy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So the first part of this question requires a bit of context. So we need to talk about what athlete we're talking about first. So when we're talking about heavy, does it make you slower? It could if you only trained heavy all the time, and then you never transferred that heavy training to power type training.
Yes.
So we know very clearly now that stronger athletes develop power more quickly compared to weaker athletes. So with developmentally younger athletes that have a younger training age that are not that strong yet, the best benefits that you can get are from raising their maximal strength level first, getting it up to a level that is associated with their sports performance. It's not an arbitrary number. People throw out things like 2 times your body weight in the back squat. That's not really what it is. It's just getting your maximal strength ceiling to a level that's going to let you express the forces needed in your sport. And depending on the sport, those levels will be different. A soccer player is going to have different force capability needs than an American football player. Those are going to be different. So the strength levels will have to be different. Now the issue becomes is if you never transfer your strength into power development. So once you've reached an agreeable level of strength, the training means and methods need to adjust. And then you start transferring that maximal strength ceiling that you have into other physical capabilities and things like rate of force development, power output, and working on impulse, so force times time, that are related to your sport. And that means shifting from very heavy training to a more mixed method approach. You still lift heavy to maintain that force production capabilities, but that's on maintenance. Then we start doing things like weightlifting movements. We do plyometrics, change of direction and agility drills. We do sprinting, and that carries our maximal strength more towards the demands of sport.
Yeah.
And so you're still touching on the physical quality of maximal strength to retain it, but then you shift most of your energy into maximal muscular power output at that time. And that's really where I think the disconnect is, thinking that you always train heavy and we're always trying to push maximal strength higher and higher. For many sports, that's not the rate limiting impact, is your maximal strength level. It's your ability to express those forces at the right time.
Yeah, and I think that's where like we can emphasize the applied side and how important it is for the coaches listening, the strength coaches especially listening, that you have a really good relationship with the sport coaches and have had these conversations. Because one of the other challenges that comes into play here along the lines of what everything you're talking about, Chris, is when a sport season begins, trying to manipulate all of these things and buy in, right? And so I think back to a beautifully ideal situation that I had when I was working at Ithaca with track and field and cross country. And like the coaches were bought into this idea, which allowed me to explain to the athletes and work with the athletes, you know, because for sprinters to feel heavy legs when they're sprinting, right? What they call my legs feel heavy. That's a real mind F. Like that really messes with them. But when we could create that buy-in and help them understand that we are going to have a few meets like that, but the meets that really mattered, where we're going to start qualifying for things and all of that, is when we would be shifting into more of that power production, and that would go away, and it in fact did, right? That's where it's so important that the relationships with the buy-in, that's a great applied example that we need to get that buy-in from both the sport coaches and the athletes themselves.
Yeah. I think it's also important that coaches, strength coaches, and explaining this to the sport coaches about periodization. Right. Because that's really how, if they understand program design, then they understand that, hey, there's a time where you push the maximal strength. There's
right.
a time when you ease off and do more power movements. There's a time when you taper for bigger meets, like you were saying.
Sure.
So, you know, understanding program design, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah.
Awesome.
What else did I want to ask here? I think that's really about it. Let's just break down the periodization a little bit. Depending on where they are in their cycle, and Cait mentioned this a little bit, how much do they need to really work on their strength, the maximal strength? I know there's a lot of variables.
Yeah, so the younger and weaker an athlete is, the more time you need to use to develop maximal strength early on.
Yeah.
This also, for certain sports, can be coupled with hypertrophy development. So if you're undersized for your sport and you need to get to the next level and the athletes are bigger, you can develop hypertrophy early and then layer maximal strength on top. Once you get to that agreeable level of size and strength, then you begin moving to the power development side. And that's really what happens once you get strong enough. Now, that's kind of in a multi-year setup. If you're considering periodization across an athlete's career, freshman size and strength, maximal strength as a sophomore, then you start getting into power development more as a junior, and then you're really tapering and peaking with power development in your senior year when you want to have your best outcomes if you're thinking of like a collegiate career.
Sure.
But then when you look at each individual annual plan, it's going to be varied throughout the plan. So the off season, typically in the American system, you're only allowed to interact with the athletes 8 hours a week, both the strength coach and the head coach, due to the NCAA rules. And so that time, most of the training is spent doing resistance training and small drills and development there. That time of the year is typically higher volumes of training at lower intensities, and those are going to help to build up your work capacity. You then blend in towards maximal strength near the end of the off season when you're building those capabilities up. Then, as the specific preparation period, which is really about 12 weeks in the American system leading up to the competition time, that coincides with the preseason. You start to shift your maximal strength capabilities to more power development. And then you're also layering in your sport-specific skills that you're working with your coach. So that's where the balancing act of training and practice comes in. And then you move into your competitive season for however long that is. For some sports, they have a really long season, so their periodization plan looks different, where you're doing more work early in the season because it lasts so long.
Yep.
Others may just have a few really important meets that you need to peak for. So that's really context dependent.
Yep.
And at that time, it's managing fatigue, managing game stress, life and school stress, and then trying to peak and be ready for the most important times. The nice thing during that time is that maximal strength can be really maintained for a while with very minimal amounts of training and only needing to touch on it a few times, allowing you to focus on other qualities like speed and power output. So that's kind of a nice thing about maximal strength. Once it's there, it's easy to maintain for many weeks after, just touching on it minimally throughout the competitive season.
And getting back to, from a coach's standpoint who says teaching the lifts is too difficult, when they're working the maximal strength, they can still do the light technique type things for the snatch and the clean and jerk or whatever the segments of those lifts that they are. So they don't necessarily have to go heavy on those lifts at the same time they're doing the heavy movements and the, your squats and your pulls and things like that. So they're still developing that maximal strength. And if nothing else, use the snatch and the clean and jerk, the light weights, the teaching patterns, and doing that at the beginning of the workout just to energize the nervous system. And it's a great warm-up, and at the same time reinforcing the technique.
Yeah, there's some pretty good evidence from a weightlifting coach, and they said that you should begin every single workout with a speed strength exercise, regardless of what you're doing next.
Exactly.
So if you're on a maximal strength block and you throw in some high velocity movements like a power snatch from the hip or below the knee, and you're really working on the velocity side, so it's still a moderately heavy weight but moving very quickly, that may actually make the strength work you do next better. This can also be accomplished with plyometrics as well before doing a lift, so there's many different methods. But blending these different methods together is what makes your program better when you understand how they all fit together like a puzzle.
Yeah.
And so if you can do technique work that's heightening the nervous system's ability, it's going to enhance all your strength work afterwards. You're now teaching technique, you're getting nervous system development, and you're priming the maximal strength, which is your main goal for that session. So it all kind of fits together in a really nice way, and it leads right into the next training block that's going to follow afterwards.
And I think from a motivational standpoint, when you're trying to motivate your athletes, if all you do is light technique work, they're going to get bored. They want to do strength stuff. And so I think that's from a motivational standpoint, they get that neuromuscular work in, and at the same time they can get their strength work in. And as far as motivation, that way you're accomplishing a little bit of everything. And the athletes will buy into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
How are we doing for time there, Cait?
We're good. I think we're about at wrap-up point.
I think we're getting close.
Yeah.
Great.
So let's chit chat mentor program, because I know it's near and dear to all of our hearts. I shared a little bit about how we founded it, but Chris, why don't you give us a little overview of the mentor program from your perspective, since you recently mentored our last round of mentees.
So we built this program because I wanted to give back to other coaches and give back to coaches starting out or coaches looking for a fresh perspective on their knowledge base.
Yeah.
And really, I wanted to take the knowledge that I learned from Leo and that I learned from my time in school and to be able to put it into a digestible format and provide coaches with a sounding board for things that are happening with the athletes or clients that they're working with.
Yeah.
And so what we did from there was we built out a mentorship program, and we have, a science-backed portion where we go into the physiology of training, Then we have a technical focus, the technical execution of all the different types of exercises you would need. And then we get into the coaching side, the coaching theory, philosophy, and the nitty-gritty of how to coach and interact with athletes, building on the soft skills of coaching, as they're called, really to make you a well-rounded coach. And so our mentorship program guides you through all these different steps, through these different modules that we built out, and really helps you to problem solve issues that come up, and then further your knowledge base so that you can be a better coach along the way.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said, and then some. I resonate a lot with that. It was a lot of my why for wanting to build out this program together. And, you know, as you heard earlier in the episode, I alluded to some poor mentor experiences that I had along the way early on. Chris and I have also had some really phenomenal mentorship experiences with people like Leo, as well as other additional mentors. And I think we both felt really strongly, and I know Leo feels this way as well along his journey, we both felt really strongly about being able to offer that to people who were either in situations where they weren't getting good mentorship or receiving it, or didn't have access to mentors. A lot of times early in your career, when you do need to bounce around a bit, because unfortunately that's the way the industry's been designed, you're just being treated like someone who's cleaning off benches and you're observing. So we want to change that. We want to shift that, and we want to offer a space where you can ask those questions, right? Yes, it's material that you may have learned in your textbooks, but you didn't actually have the opportunity to ask someone about that material in an applied way. And so now we become that sounding board while you're navigating difficult situations with an athlete, while you're struggling to understand theoretical concepts and how they actually apply to the real world. So it's really beautiful how that occurs in both the small cohort settings, and then when we come together once a month in the big group, and Leo really gets an opportunity to lead and mentor everyone who's in the program, in addition to alums that are welcome to come back anytime for a full group call. So.
We always talk about the bumps along the road that we all have experienced, and a lot of the things that we had to kind of figure out on our own through trial and error. And one of the goals, at least I feel, for this mentorship is that we want to smooth those bumps out for people, you know, because we don't want that learning process to take forever. And sometimes they never figure it out anyway. So we want to try to kind of smooth those bumps out, and that just kind of moves people along a little bit and saves a lot of time, because we spend a lot of time doing this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Chris, I mean, we shared about the mentor program. If people are interested in joining the next cohort, we usually start another group in the fall. Go to tottentraining.com, get yourself on the wait list so that you're the first to learn. We usually have fun, kind of exclusive access to anyone on the wait list. But I also want people to be able to connect with you directly. Why don't you share a little bit about what you have going on at Sacred Heart and how people who are interested in connecting in that way can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so Cait will link my email to the show notes. You can email me at any time. I always respond to all my emails when people write in. So we have a 2-year master's program here that is both strength conditioning or sports science. You can pick either track. The schooling is the same for everybody until your second year. Then you branch off. If you want to do strength conditioning, you do internships. If you want to do sports science, you do research projects and you create a thesis. And right now, we have more opportunities available than we have students in the program.
Wow, that's
and
rare.
So basically, anyone that comes in is going to work with athletes. Starting off first semester, we work with multiple teams. We have multiple research projects going on. And anyone that comes here is going to be able to come in and immediately start getting experience in the field working with various levels of athletes. We have rolling admissions, so there's no cutoff date. You can apply, and we'll get you in. Our next group starts in August. We're on just the regular fall-spring schedule. And I do have some funding available for different positions, and so we're always trying to fill those. Our program is smaller in that we have professors working directly with students at a very close level. And so you're going to get one-on-one instruction from myself and the other professors in the program.
So rare.
And your cohort is about 10 to 15 people, so you get to meet all these great people. And we have about 6 to 8 professors that teach in the program. So it's a really nice environment where you're able to get that one-on-one instruction, and you'll be able to get all the experience you need to go and head out and work right afterwards. So I'm happy to say that we've had a 100% placement rate for all of our graduates for the past 3 years, and so we're going to keep that going. And so I'm really proud of that fact.
And I can share that I've had a handful of past either college athletes or undergrad interns that interned under me that went on to work or to go to work on the master's program here with Chris, and who just had phenomenal experiences and are working in the field, and it's really, really rare. Well done. Awesome.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. We'll have to get you back on again to really geek out on some deeper science stuff, maybe some weightlifting, hypertrophy talk and the like on another part 2.
Sounds great.
But we appreciate your time, as always.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
And the thing about Chris is he makes things very digestible.
Yeah.
Okay? Things that when you read studies, sometimes, you really have to study that study. And he breaks it down into very digestible chunks that anybody can understand, even if they're not a PhD, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, and I appreciate that because, again, it's that bridging that gap, and he is so good at doing that sort of thing. And we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
For sure.
All right, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Cait, thank you so much. Chris, awesome, man. Thank you so much. Okay, really appreciate everybody.